drummer. Uh, and I do have a really good drummer joke. And the good drummer joke is, what is the difference between a drummer and a pizza? A drummer will never feed a family of four. There you go, Una.
That was good filling, Owen. I think
Dead air filled. Over to you.
have we got a screen? Can people see the screen okay?
Yes, we are good.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, everyone. Hello. I know some of you I don't know. Um, Thanks for joining us today. So I am currently working with Arts Council England as a responsible AI fellow in a role that's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. My real job or my other job, I'm senior lecturer in digital culture and society at Goldsmiths, and I'm also a fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. So I've been working around the space around emerging technologies and data cultures for about the last 15 years now. But in this role, I've been really working as an embedded researcher, helping Arts Council to think from a strategic perspective, but also a practical perspective about what AI means for them as an organization, but I guess also more widely for the sector. And I've been working with Owen, so over to you, Owen.
Hi there. As well as being a drummer with lots of drummer jokes, my name's Owen Hopkin. I'm the Director of New Technologies and Innovation at Arts Council England, and I'd say most of my role is involved in policy making around the use of new and emerging technologies by the cultural sector uh, in both a creative and operational context. I'm also the Director at Arts Council England that's been leading our AI work along with Una, which we're very happy and thrilled to talk to you about.
Cool. Thanks, Owen. So before we dive in, it's probably worth noting most of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is in a report that we published in June, called Responsible AI in Practice. And I think the link to it is in the chat. So you can find it there, or if you Google AI Arts Council England, you'll be able to find it. The report goes into a lot more detail than what we're going to go into today, and we're really just kind of focusing on top lines and a bit of context around what we've been doing at Arts Council England, but also why Arts Council England is interested in AI. But yeah, so just to signpost that there is more detail online. But yeah, Owen, I think you're going to kick
Yeah,
it off and tell us who is Arts Council England?
thank you, Una. So, Arts Council England is the national development agency for creativity and culture in England. We have around 700 staff. They're distributed across 9 offices in England, and we invest public money, mainly taken from the government and the National Lottery. And that's used, obviously, then to support the arts and cultural sector. And I'd say our ambition is set out in our strategy called Let's Create. Let's Create is a 10-year strategy. We're halfway through it at the moment. And that is largely to ensure that everyone in England has access to high quality cultural experiences in the places where they live and work, but then that all creativity by everyone, of all individuals, is valued and nurtured. But I think the question kind of that we have in front of us today is that why is Arts Council thinking about AI? And I'd say our thinking about it has evolved over time. So in 2018, we commissioned a piece of research to try and understand or explore the nascent uses of AI in the cultural sector. And that was really to try and get a sense of where and how or if it was being used. But I think, like many people and organizations in the sector and generally around the world, there was definitely a step change in our interest when ChatGPT 3 launched in November 22. Um, and that prompted our interest in some very big questions, such as implications for intellectual property, the environmental footprint or the environmental responsibility that needs to go hand in hand with the use of AI. But also then for us as an arm's length body, the government and the bureaucracy, how we might use it for efficiencies, and then clearly as a creative tool as well. So once we began to surface that, it started becoming clear that we need to make progress in 3 specific areas. And they were, firstly, how we might understand the challenges and opportunities of using AI internally at the Arts Council. The second was then how we help the sector understand the challenges and opportunities. And then finally, how, as the sector body representing arts and culture, do we influence UK policy around the use of AI. But as Una said, it's those first two areas, the internal and external, that we're going to talk to you about today. So, Una, I think it's back to you now for the beginning of that internal work.
Sure. So when we began doing this work back in May 24 now, Arts Council hadn't taken a position on using AI technologies for its staff. Um, and I think when I was brought in, I think there was a sense that this was a bit of a horizon scanning exercise. Um, but my sense very early on in the organization was that it was more advanced in its AI journey than perhaps the exec board realized. And I think that is quite common across the board. So we began by collecting data to really have an empirical evidence base to develop insights and views around what the current practices of AI at Arts Council are, but also where there was interest and ambition for further use. But we also wanted to use this baseline staff survey to understand the sentiment. What did people feel about these technologies and how they might be used? Um, the data from the survey really evidenced the need for developing a policy and really at haste, because what we identified were that staff were already using these technologies. Not all staff, but a significant proportion of staff were using these technologies. And they were doing so in a pretty ungoverned way, which again, not unique to the Arts Council, very common across the board. Um, I think the survey data really evidence the need for a policy from a legal compliance and reputational risk perspective. The survey made it clear that AI is not a near future technology, but it's a technology that had already arrived at Arts Council England. And I think initially when we were doing this work, we were thinking about creating a guidance document. And actually, the data that we got from the staff survey reframed that in the mind of exec board, who felt, no, this is something that has legal implications and has reputational risk possibilities. So we need to move from guidance to a really clear policy. In order to do that, we felt it was really important that we engaged across the organisation. So the ultimate decision-making power around the adoption of any policy sits with the executive board. But I think from my own experience and Owen's experience as well, we know that digital transformation really requires consultation, active listening and co-production to ensure adoption is implemented across the organisation. And we kind of sat down and we thought, well, how do we do that? We wanted to get staff on board from the start of the project. We wanted staff to know that this was a genuine research and development process. At no point were we pushing AI. So we haven't been in a position where we're selling AI to staff, but instead the approach has been staff are using AI and we need to develop and implement policy that protects the organization, but also enables staff to be ambitious if they want to engage with these technologies. The other thing we wanted was for staff to know that the policy existed. So this is an organisation with multiple offices around the country, some of which is sector facing, some of it is internal facing. And so we decided the best approach was to create an oversight group, which had around, I think it's about 12 directors. It's chaired by an executive director. And that was really our advisory group from a management perspective. But it was also our critical friend group before we brought stuff to exec board. Alongside that, we also created the Responsible AI Reference Group. And the Responsible AI Reference Group, which in hindsight I would like to say is the longest and worst name for any group I've ever chaired, we now call it the working group, was chaired by me. And that was a really interesting group because we actively recruited people to be on that group that think AI is awful. We looked at the sentiment data from the staff survey and we recruited so that the sentiment of the organisation in the data was reflected in this group. So we had some people that think AI is brilliant. We had some people that were cautious but curious. And we had some people that felt Arts Council shouldn't touch this with a barge pole. And this was a really, really useful community of practice. We drafted a policy document and we brought it to them and they tore it apart and made it better. And I was just writing this morning an email to the group and I was saying it's very easy to sit in the group that's really nice, and it's very easy to sit in the group that's really critical. But I think where this group really succeeded was it sat in that really brilliant constructive criticism space. Everything that we've produced out of this AI work at Arts Council has been made better by the diversity of perspectives and opinions that we've had across the organisation. And I guess probably the last thing I'd say on that responsible AI group that I felt was really important was that we had the most junior to the most senior staff. Arts Council is a public sector body, it's quite hierarchical in organisation, but AI doesn't do hierarchies. And so it was really important that we saw this as a learning and development opportunity for more junior staff and supported and encouraged them to become active members of this community of practice. Um, so the AI policy itself is grounded in the organization's corporate values. We care, we learn, we're ambitious. And this really aligns it with the operating context that staff will be using this policy within. It was designed really to empower individual staff and the organization to apply their existing knowledge and practice as a foundation for responsible engagement with AI. So one of the things that we did was we looked at what's the existing frameworks the organization operates within. And one of them is the Nolan principles of public life. And so for those of you that aren't aware of it, that includes selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. So we didn't need to create new principles for AI. Instead, we embedded the existing principles that existed. We also looked at legal compliance, and most highly on that was UK GDPR. Rather than using the policy to police behaviour, we wanted to drive engagement and confidence with the aim of the policy proactively supporting staff and helping them to recognise transferable skills, knowledge, and practices that they already have, which they can apply to these technologies. One area of operational practice, grant making processes, giving people money, stood out as a really interesting value-based line. Staff felt really strongly that the work of assessment and decision making in grant making required expert skill and human nuance and should at this time not be assisted by generative AI technologies. So this was an interesting one, legally possible, technically possible, but not right for the organisation. And I think this is where we're at with a lot of AI policy. There are questions about values. There are questions about what's legally possible and what's technically possible. But I think if we start from the ground up and we look at values as our foundation, we can create really tailored AI policies that speak to an organization's purpose. When we were thinking about grant making processes in this red line that was established very much from our responsible AI working group, it was an area that staff felt the organisation needed to take a public position on. Increasingly, people were saying to staff at Arts Council England, if they hadn't received funding, they weren't successful in an application. Nobody even read this. It was just put through AI. That was never the case. But there was nothing on the website. There was no public statement that outlined this process. And staff felt that this would be a really important document that would allow external facing stakeholders to understand the position that they had arrived at. So alongside that values-based piece, the other core piece is around legal compliance and GDPR. When we brought the policy to the executive board in Feb 2025, there was a really rigorous discussion around the values, the legal and the technical that were presented in this policy. But again, coming back to that initial research we did, that initial asking staff what they were doing, executive board felt that the policy should be adopted and rollout was a key imperative for the work that we were doing going forward. Another key component of this was developing a risk list in order to operationalize the policy. So I think, Owen, you're going to come in here.
Yeah, and I'd say, Una, we considered this really a companion piece to the policy because, where the policy is directive in terms of acceptable and non-acceptable use cases, we recognized that not all staff have the skills or knowledge to make assessments about the suitability of AI platforms, and lots of staff don't have the time either. So to kind of address that, we created a risk list, and what that was, or what that is an evolving document that just provides some analysis by the data governance team on the appropriate use cases of various AI platforms. And the platforms that we assessed initially were just those that came through the survey that Una mentioned. And what we've done, it's a fairly unflashy Excel spreadsheet, and it's coded green, amber, red. And depending on the analysis and the appropriate use of these tools and their GDPR compliance, a tool is graded green, amber, or red, dependent on that assessment. And I think what this does is just provide, a very quick and easy document for staff to try and understand whether this is a tool that they should be using and could be using in various situations. And very quickly, this document became known as like the we read the terms of service, so you don't have to list, because that's exactly kind of what's sat behind it, basically. So should we just move on quickly, Una, to the public statement? And I think Una's mentioned some of this already, but we published a public statement earlier this year. It came through very clearly from the staff that it felt like Arts Council England needed to state their position on AI, particularly in relation to a couple of areas. So the sector, as Una mentioned, had told us or weren't sure whether it was appropriate for them to use AI in writing funding applications to us. And uh, there was also some suspicion that we were already using AI to make funding decisions. So the statement was very, very brief and very to the point and very clear. And it just does two things. So the first is that it says that we can't stop people from using AI tools to write applications in the way that we can't stop them paying people to write their applications, which also happens. But we do point out, through using AI, there are risks, similar tone and language being one, and obviously what they submit to us then is something that they're entirely responsible for. And then the second thing the statement says very clearly is that we don't use AI in the decision-making process for funding. Those decisions are made by colleagues with experience and expertise to just ensure the process is fair and transparent. And I do think it's kind of really worth saying that the statement and the policy work actually was helped enormously by the consultation with our governance groups and other public and private organizations. And having worked on lots of different policies at the Arts Council for a while, one of the big differences here felt like, because lots of organizations were at similar stages with their thinking around AI, that culture of sharing and being collaborative and collegiate to try and understand where everyone else was to get to the best possible position was really, really kind of excellent. And I don't know, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and unprecedented in a way. But anyway, let's move on to the next slide. And I think almost the last part of the tangible, concrete internal AI work that we did was in September 24. We initiated 5 pilot projects just across various business functions at Arts Council England. The pilots were small scale, required minimal resource, and they operated within a strict and structured test environment. There was a consistent framework or methodology that we devised, and that was aligned to the generative AI framework for government. And that just made sure that the pilots that we were doing were legally compliant, ethically robust, and just delivered in a responsible way. And what I'd say about the pilots was that even though the main objective wasn't to build a tool and deploy it, it was just to explore them. I think we learned a huge amount from that process, and that included, well, firstly, the development of that robust project methodology. It definitely helped the AI literacy of different teams across Arts Council. We as an organization became more confident in our IT and data management practices around AI, but I think almost most importantly, it just reinforced that notion that AI isn't a silver bullet. It relies on good quality data, but it definitely works best with well-defined and efficient systems and processes. And almost, the biggest kind of learning in doing these pilots was actually looking at our real life business as usual processes before we laid an AI tool on top, and frequently found that that's where we needed to make the changes rather than just try and fix it with generative AI, some kind of tool, machine learning, etc. Anyway, Una, back to you.
Cool. And I think, yeah, probably just picking up on that point, and I think it also links to the internal comms piece. I mentioned briefly my role at Arts Council. Because my role is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and it is a research post, it's provided the organisation with extra capacity to think about these things. So the kind of business deliverables that Owen is working on, I don't have. And so that ability and that space to think about these technologies and also look at some existing processes, I think is probably quite unique to this project and this approach that would maybe be slightly different if it had come from a consultancy perspective where deliverables were key. I think my role has very much been about process, and we've delivered a lot. I think we've delivered more than we probably set out to deliver because process was key in this. But I think it has provided space to look at some existing processes in a different light. So that's my sales pitch for academics. But back to our presentation. So that conversation, that space, like a real kind of key part of all of this work has been internal comms, who have been really supportive of this and really saw that this had to be a cross-organization conversation. And a key part of this was creating on the staff internet a specific AI section. So we have a bunch of resources there now that allow staff to go and do their own little bits of learning and development. So presentations, things to read, some explainer guides. But we've spent and invested a lot of time in trying to speak to as many people as possible. And we really think that that is just as important as any technology in the way we've been working. And so on that conversation piece, we started getting lots of emails about AI. And we were all kind of giving different responses. So we developed an AI triage service, which we we stole from the BBC. We have taken lots of bits of our processes from different organizations who have all been so super generous. It's been a really lovely dialogue and exchange. And so BBC, we had a great conversation with them about like how do we operationalize this in an organization that exists in different offices around the country. And so they talked to us about their triage service, and has been a really, really useful way to centralize the questions that have come from the policy rollout. So thanks to BBC for that. But it's also allowed us to see the emerging challenges across the organisation around the use of AI tools in ways that we probably didn't see when we first launched the policy. The triage service is also there as a compliance mechanism. As an employee, it's your responsibility to abide by the policy. If you want to do something and you don't understand the policy, then the onus is on you to ask the question before you do that. So this provides a compliance mechanism for the organization, but it also provides an opportunity for staff to ask questions and be ambitious in their thinking around these technologies. Okay, Owen, some reflections, please.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty with reflections is I think there've been so many, it's really difficult to get it into one slide. But I think the obvious thing to say, and something that we've said already, is that the whole work that we've done at the Arts Council has been shaped enormously by that extensive consultation and reflection to just help us build a strong evidence base and create a really engaging dialogue. And because of that, I think, throughout the exercise, Owen and I just kept coming back to a conversation and a belief really that an AI policy isn't a technical document. It's not an IT document. And I don't think it's a technical task either. I think it's one that needs to hear from the entire organization because the technology is so pervasive. So ensuring the organization's values are front and center with that sort of work is really important. And I think the reason why that's important is because, in a landscape where no one has all the answers, and in a landscape that is moving really quickly, I actually think the best possible position to take as an organization, and the one that's most authentic and credible and defensible, is one that's based on your own organization's values. And I think that's kind of what we tried to do, and what we ended up, I think, doing with this piece of work. Una?
Yeah, cheers. Okay. I'm conscious of time. We've crammed two presentations into one today. The second bit is bonus content that we decided yesterday, but let's see, we'll fly through stuff. So alongside the report, we also published a series of worksheets or toolkit documents. Um, and these are really step-by-step process guides that were created really for the cultural sector and public sector in mind. What we've loved about it, we've had lots of really positive feedback about this. Wildlife trusts have been in touch and have said that they're using it. So I think they have been created by the Arts Council, but they're not culture specific documents. They are really step-by-step guides. And I think if you're a small organization with one or two people, you could probably fill in all of these in an afternoon. If you're a large organization, you could probably spend 6 months workshopping all of the ideas in these. So they're scalable in their approach. Um, okay, so we decided that we should probably, since it is the Arts Council, talk also a little bit about how Arts Council is investing in artists using AI. So this is the first time this section has been aired in public. It may be chaotic, it may be fabulous. Let's see. Owen, kick us off.
All right, so in terms of this bonus content, we are definitely now into that second area of work that I mentioned right at the start, which is how the Arts Council helps the sector navigate the challenges and opportunities of AI. And I think in a really fundamental way, we do that through our 10-year strategy, Let's Create. And that is to encourage and champion creative practitioners who are engaging with new and emerging technologies in really creative ways. And one of the first things that Una did when she joined us, and was a really, really impressive piece of work, was kind of research exactly how much we'd supported artists that had engaged with artificial intelligence tools and technologies, and kind of how Arts Council had supported it, how much it had been invested. So Una, back to you.
Sure. Um, so Arts Council England has something called national portfolio organizations, around 990 organizations. So most of the big cultural organizations are national portfolio organizations, but also lots and lots of small, regional, rural, really tiny organizations with only a few staff form this massive portfolio of arts and culture that exists across England. And within that, there are a really wide range of organizations that support artists, communities, and audiences to engage with AI technologies in creative, engaging, and challenging ways. So, from Serpentine Galleries in London to Fact in Liverpool and Watershed in Bristol. This network, this cultural sector, is really strongly positioned to support place-based delivery in communities across the country, from the largest cities to the smallest villages. And I think just to pick up on a few, Serpentine Galleries Creative AI Lab, a partnership with King's College London, have been doing really interesting work with artists Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst to produce an exhibition that really looked at the role of data custodians and the role of data governance. So not only were they engaging it in this work around data governance in their creative practice, they also sought to create legal and policy changes around data governance in wider society. The Photographers Gallery, again in London, who commission artists to engage with the implications of algorithms on our way of seeing the world. Or the National Youth Theatre, who have established a digital accelerator program with Microsoft, which is equipping the next generation of talent to engage in the latest generative AI technologies. So there's this massive network of place-based delivery around creative technology and AI that exists across the country. These organizations often serve as a bridge between emerging technology and creative practice, and they provide a really important critical lens from which we can drive AI literacy in wider society. Okay, Owen.
Yeah. So if that national portfolio of regularly funded organizations is one way in which we fund artists and creatives and organizations to engage with new and emerging technologies. There are other ways in which we do that too, and they are through developing your creative practice, which is one program, and National Lottery project grants. So developing your creative practice, or DYCP, as we call it at the Arts Council, just supports individual creatives and cultural practitioners to focus on their development to help them go to the next stage of their practice. And the type of thing that includes are, you know, funding them to help them build new networks, experiment with new collaborators or partners. And applicants on this program can, apply for between 2,000 and 12,000. And frequently artists come in, or practitioners want to come in, to try and explore and understand how they move forward with the use of new and emerging digital technologies in a creative sense. So I also mentioned the National Lottery project grants. This is a bit more straightforward. It's an open access program for arts, libraries, and museums projects, and the fund supports, thousands of individual practitioners, community groups, cultural organizations, and they can apply for grants of between £1,000 and £100,000, or over £100,000 if they're nationally significant or touring projects. So there are a couple of headline figures from those two programs, and since 2018, we've invested over £4 million in over 200 creative projects, where the artist, practitioner, or organization have been using or experimenting or creating with AI technologies. And next slide, Una. And also to say and also to just say that investment covers all of the 9 art forms that we fund at Arts Council, but that investment, has happened in every region of England. And I think that that piece of those stats, as straightforward as they are, weren't stats that we had before Una joined us. And working for the Arts Council and being aware of the perception that maybe it isn't the most forward-thinking or technologically literate organization, allowed us to say very clearly that, actually we've been funding this work for a while, and actually funding it at significant levels, both in terms of number of projects and sheer investment pounds. So, Una, back to you.
Cool. So some art. What do these projects look like? Just going to very briefly introduce you to some examples, but you can go and look at them at your leisure. So one example is Otmo, and this is a user-friendly digital platform that enables dancers and educators to sequence and create movement using motion capture and AI. This was developed by Alexander Whitley, and it fills a really interesting critical gap in the creative technology market because it makes advanced tools usable without specialist knowledge. So Alexander Whitley, who's a dancer and a choreographer, saw that motion capture technology, whilst used in industry, was too expensive and too difficult for teachers to access or small dance companies to access. So he, through Arts Council funding, was able to create an application that you can use on your phone to bring these technologies at a scalable perspective. And he also used this funding as seed funding, which allowed him to develop an early prototype, and has went on to leverage further funding from this. The next project then is a project called Consensus Gentium, which was a tour by Karen Palmer with Crossover Labs. And it brought interactive AI storytelling to 11 shopping centres across England. I think it attracted about 14,000 visitors. And it engaged visitors in conversations about surveillance, bias, and data futures. The project revealed both the appetite and the challenges of making critical technology discourse accessible to diverse public audiences. And interestingly, for that project, they specifically targeted shopping centres in marginalised communities who they felt were disproportionately affected by these technologies, but also were the communities that had limited access to understanding how the technologies work. Okay, and the final one I'm going to show you then is a project called Women of AI, Women Reclaiming AI, which is a participatory arts project and technology project led by Dr. Coral Manton and Dr. Brigitte Aga, supported by Arts Council England. The project brought together women and gender diverse communities to co-create a feminist voice assistant. So we kind of remember that first wave of voice technology where all voice assistants were women because women are helpful. And they said, we're tired and exhausted of being helpful. What happens if like the chatbot fights or the voice assistants fights back? So through workshops, data creation, and international recognition, they created a data set of marginalized female voices to give alternative answers that were less helpful than the tropes that were provided by the mainstream tech companies. But they used this to open up new pathways for inclusive digital futures. Their work included marginalized women and homeless women, and it led to interesting conversations about the impact of AI and lived experience of street homeless. So providing these alternative perspectives that are not driven by commercial need. And so these are just some examples of what we find in this 200 data sets of really important work that not only is creatively significant, but also significant for the wider adoption of these technologies in society. Okay, I think we've managed to squeeze it in just. Oh, and over to you. Wrap us up. You've got
I
one
think,
second.
yeah. So a couple of reflections, and like the reflections on the internal work, actually, I think, there've been so many that it's difficult to get this into one slide too. But I think from Una's work and what we're seeing is that, artists and creative practitioners aren't waiting for permission to explore AI. They're already using it, they're experimenting with it, and they're already reshaping their creative practices through it. And I think across those 200 projects that we funded, and in the projects that Una's just highlighted, we're definitely seeing new ways of working that like not only embrace technology, but also challenge it, question it, and reimagine what it can be. And you know, I think everyone on this call, will certainly be aware and probably be expert in the debates around AI and wider society. But I think what this information shows us is that the creative sector is already showing what's possible, when imagination leads innovation. And I think our role at Arts Council England is to ensure that those conditions, are basically right for that to continue. And I think that is a fundamental and vital part of what we should be doing as the National Development Agency for Culture and Creativity, which is goes right back to the core and point of the Arts Council, whatever the discipline, is to just help creativity thrive, through the right investment, through the right support and opportunities, so that artists can continue to shape how AI affects culture, people, and the planet. So on that kind of strident, fairly sweeping statement, I think that's it. Thank you. Thanks very much for listening, and happy to take any questions if anyone has any.